Putin's chances of victory in Ukraine shrinking, and how Robert Fico seeks to leave Ukraine without electricity in order to secure Russian oil supplies. We will talk about this with Oleh Rybachuk, a former Deputy Prime Minister for EU integration. Oleh, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Long live Ukraine, and let's talk.
Let's talk. The Wall Street Journal, citing European Union officials, reports that the war in Ukraine is expected to continue for another 1 to 3 years. Russia is negotiating in bad faith, seeking to obtain through diplomacy what it has been unable to achieve on the battlefield, control over the Donbas region. How do you personally assess the likelihood that the war in Ukraine could last another 1 to 3 years? In your view, what factors will most significantly influence the duration of the war?
Well, the number of voices saying that the war might go for another year or 3 is growing. Today, just recently, I've read, I don't know to what extent this information is available, that President Zelensky was speaking to his closest aides, asking them to prepare the strategy for the next 3 years for Ukraine to defend itself. You know that there were information about informal briefings of heads of top 5 security organizations, so-called Five Eyes, which all of them practically said that they see no signs of reaching peace agreement this year, because for obvious lack of any hints coming from President Putin, which would prove that he is looking for a peace solution. Only President Trump, for some mysterious reasons, believe that Putin is seeking to sign and willing to sign this peace deal. So overall, general mood is that as we speak at this moment, there are no indications of desire of Putin to stop warfare. And, you know, if Putin doesn't want it, American president probably could increase pressure. But again, he is not doing that, though he signed or he extended for another year sanctions against Russia, but those are not really critical. And new, much more severe package of sanctions, which is prepared in Congress and Senate. President Trump is not indicating that he would like that law to be voted, and he is not indicating any signals that he is prepared to sharply increase pressure on Russia, though he can do it. He can much harder hit energy and banking sector of Russia. And instead, we hear the same story that Ukraine must quickly run for the table of negotiations because Putin is willing to sign a deal and Ukraine is not. We hear this story almost for a year. Therefore, I personally do not see at this point any signs of visible perspectives for a peace deal. You asked about factors which could lead to this. It is clear for me that economic pressure can get its results because numerous sources, both in Russia and outside Russia, say that, Russian economy is under pressure and the situation is deteriorating much quicker than Russians expected, both economically, financially, and the sanctions against shadow fleet, so-called oil tankers, which Russia is actively using to export its oil, is also getting its results. India, after pressure from Trump, has noticeably reduced purchase of Russian oil, though it is not a total refusal to import Russian oil, because India is trying to balance. They benefit from the fact that they are one of two largest buyers of Russian oil, therefore they can dictate the price, so they can lower more the price. But overall, the number of countries willing to purchase Russian oil is shrinking. And India, as one of the biggest countries, recently demonstrates that it is ready to change the suppliers of oil and gas, buying American oil or other Arab countries' oil, because there is a variety of suppliers in this sector. The strategy of Trump is actually to push Russia, to squeeze Russia mostly out of largest oil and gas markets. And here there are egoistic, I would say, motives for Trump.
We have many questions. What could change the situation? President Volodymyr Zelensky was asked whether he would order the assassination of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Zelensky gave an indirect response, the context of which suggested that it is not certain such a killing would fundamentally change the situation, as it concerns an already established and deeply entrenched system. In your opinion, would Putin's death change anything at all?
Yeah, I would agree that there is collective Putin ruling in Russia. It's called KGB, guys. I remember when I was meeting in my time being chief of staff to President Yushchenko, I remember how close aides to Putin have been bluffing or telling me how they control everything in Russia. That was 20 years ago. That they have their own men under every top Russian businesses, at every top Russian oligarch, at every top foreign banks. They have their KGB or FSB offices, and they control everything. Since that time, Putin has absolutely concentrated the power. But still, keeping all this in mind, if God allows Putin to join his colleagues in hell sometime sooner, the fact that Putin will not be president of Russia is a big chance of changes. Even though there might be his colleagues also with KGB background, but Russia is the kind of country where change of leader has a big impact. Let's remember the death of Stalin and what happened after that. Stalin was a living god in Russia. But when he died, you remember, for a brief period, there was a campaign of softening the grip of communist nomenclatura, and even attempts to get the socialism with human face, as they say. Though I believe that if Putin dies or if he would be removed from power, there will be this window of opportunity, because, frankly, majority of Russian elites, they are at one hand deeply corrupted, at the other hand they are rather deeply integrated into European countries, capitalist countries, which they are not tired to criticize. You know, their kids are studying there, they purchase real estate there, they move money there, so they like the way West Western living standards. So there are good chances that they would like to get rid of the sanctions hook. They would probably seek for solution in the war with Ukraine, because many of Russian thinking generals realize that at this point they practically are not gaining, and they don't have chances to win this war in a year, in a two, they feel exhausted and tired. Macroeconomists clearly understand that this war is practically destroying Russian economy and financial system. Businesses also clearly know that they could increase their business contacts or enter new markets. They could borrow from financial markets only by becoming much more friendly or predictable with European countries, with USA. Therefore, there is the chance that whoever will be next president of Russia might considerably change, at least for foreseeable future, change the policy and probably stop war in Ukraine and try to make a peaceful solution instead of continuing expansion and war, paying huge prices economically and from Russian soldiers' lives point of view.
Yeah, we see that Russia's economy is facing rising debt, decline in revenues, and growing difficulties reallocating resources, including reintegrating soldiers returning from the front. Russia relies increasingly on financial incentives rather than patriotic motivation for recruitment, while insufficient support for veterans and compensation disputes with families of fallen soldiers are increasing recruitment costs. About Putin's friend Viktor Orban, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has released an anti-Ukraine campaign video ahead of the elections. The footage includes images of Volodymyr Zelensky, and in the video, Orban accuses Kiev of attempting to block oil supplies via the Druzhba pipeline, destabilize Hungary from within, and finance the opposition forces challenging his government. How do you assess the political motivations behind Viktor Orban's campaign video targeting Ukraine? Your opinion?
Orban is definitely getting desperate. You could see how he was almost jumping, anticipating handshake with Trump at this Trump's peace Board of Peace meetings in Washington. His body language was self-explicit. He tried to use to maximum Secretary Rubio's visit to Budapest. He organized big rally and practically tried to show that he is the closest aide and he has full support of Trump, which actually he has. I wouldn't say that this is in the national interest of US, but I'm pretty positive that it was Trump's instruction for Rubio to go to Hungary and Slovakia as two closed sympathizers of Trump personally. And Trump is always saying that I am the man. If I like somebody, I just support that country. I am not supporting country. I am supporting those leaders whom I like. So this is classical example of Trump's logic here. But Orban is now on the final weeks of his campaign. Sociology is not very favorable for him, though he is accelerating his major game or his major tune, which is if I will lose, you Hungarians will be forced to go and die for those Ukrainians. You would be used by EU and by Ukraine to die for them. The war would embrace Hungary, and I am your only hope. I can defend you from EU. I can defend you from Ukraine because EU supports war in Ukraine. Ukraine would like to drag into this war also Hungary, and I am your last resort. I am your last fortress. So if you do not elect me, your future is very, very shaky. You will be. The war would reach out to our country, and therefore he's trying to use this natural people's desire to live in peace, to be afraid of war, as the only argument to vote for him, because Hungary is now the most corrupt and one of the poorest countries in European Union. Before Orban came to power, Hungary was doing much better. Therefore, he is trying to use these arguments. As for the supply of oil or gas to Hungary, you know that the Druzhba, the pipeline, the station was destroyed by Russian Sahid. Actually, Russians destroyed the supply. And recently, EU made a clear comment that EU will not be pressing Ukraine to focus on repairing that, because Ukraine has every day number of its energy infrastructures destroyed by Russia. Therefore, Ukraine has different priority. And EU was saying to Orban that, well, this is not desperate. You can get your oil from different suppliers. And therefore, you have 3 months reserves for oil and gas. Therefore, you can really quite securely live through winter and till summertime. So don't exaggerate. It's not the issue of life or death. Your Russian allies destroyed that pipe supply, and Ukraine has its own priorities. Ukraine has to reconstruct, to rebuild its own infrastructure, because Ukraine is under daily attacks on its energy sector. Therefore, clearly, Hungary, or that route of supply to Hungary of oil, is not a top priority for Ukraine, and Ukraine cannot be blamed for its stoppage, because Russia destroyed that pipe.
It's regrettable rhetoric and policies which cast Ukraine in a negative light, raise concerns that Hungary is more aligned with Russian interests than with the collective security and democratic values of the European Union. About Fico, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico claims that Ukraine is deliberately delaying the repair of a damaged section of the Druzhba oil pipeline, allegedly due to a political decision by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Bratislava has once again threatened to suspend electricity supplies to Kiev, and the Prime Minister also warned that Slovakia could reconsider its support for Ukrainians' European integration if this information is confirmed. How do you assess what appears to be political blackmail in this situation?
Well, here, Orban and Fico, they are acting as a team, because Hungary also said that they would stop selling diesel for Ukraine, and still in all times, Hungary is one of the big countries where we are importing diesel. So Fico is trying to blackmail from the other side, but it's to what extent would they be prepared to do that? I have my doubts, because there might be very harsh reaction from EU, because EU clearly said to both of them that rebuilding of this Druzhba pipeline cannot be a top priority for Ukraine. Zelensky or not Zelensky, we have every day attacks on our infrastructure, and we have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians living without gas and oil supply. In short, Russia destroyed or practically destroyed every major stations, electricity supplies, gas supplies, oil supplies, even water supply. Therefore, you cannot expect from Ukrainian government throwing its own sources for reopening supply of oil or gas to Hungary or Slovakia. But if Orban or Fico would risk to join Putin in attacking our energy sector, then EU might really use harsh measures. And both Orban and specifically Fico knows to what extent they depend on using EU funds, EU money. At this point, EU is slightly less outspoken with Orban because it doesn't want to give Orban another reason for saying that EU is undermining Orban, because Orban is saying that Ukraine is undermining his campaign, that Ukraine is interfering in the campaign. So EU decided to slightly lower the public criticism of Orban's government. But if he would dare to openly join Putin in attacking indirectly or directly, because if they would stop supplying diesel to Ukraine, they would join Putin in the same fight to force Ukraine to surrender. And same story to Fico. If they would dare to, they might meet very painful response from EU. And I think this is the major reason why they would not actually dare to do what they threatened to do.
Oleh, thank you so much for your professional and insightful contributions, your thoughts. It was a real pleasure speaking with you. I would like to remind you that Oleh Rybachuk, former Deputy Prime Minister for EU integration, was with us today. Wishing everyone a good, productive day and looking forward to our next meetings. See you. Thank you.
Thank you.